Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Intelligent Cooperation Group. I'm really excited today to have Aron Vallinder here, and he will be presenting on the culture, evolution, and cooperation in AI agents. I will share a lot more info about you in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions. If you want to already start discussing the talk while he's still presenting, you can. But we will give you some time of the day to present, and then we will do the presentation, a discussion afterwards. Thank you so much for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you. You're really smack on in terms of some of the themes that we've been exploring more within our grants rounds and within this group in general. So it's been really cool to see what you've been working on, and I'm excited to learn more. Thank you. The stage is yours.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for coming, everyone. And there we go. Yeah, so the title of this talk is Cultural Evolution and Cooperation in AI Agents. The background here is that soon we may have these advanced AI agents that act autonomously in the world. And I think much of their impacts will plausibly come from the ways in which they interact with one another at scale, whether as coworkers, competitors, delegates, etc. But these large-scale multi-agent systems may give rise to emergent behaviors that are difficult to predict from single-agent considerations alone. And so the key claim of my talk is that to ensure desirable outcomes, such as cooperation, we must understand how cultural evolutionary dynamics shape interactions in these multi-agent systems. So just an overview of what I'll be doing. First, I'll say a bit more about what I mean by agents and multi-agent systems, then move on to cultural evolution, discuss how that might apply to AI agents, then talk about the experimental setup and results for this sort of initial study that we did on the cultural evolution of cooperation in large language models. And then finally, I'll end with some lessons and a call to action. Okay, so agents and multi-agent systems. There's been a lot of talk about agency in the AI space lately, people saying that 2025 is going to be the year of agents. So what do we mean by this exactly? I'm a philosopher by background, and philosophers have long talked about agency, but I found this sort of recent overview of agents specifically for the context of AI that I found helpful just to give an idea of roughly what we're talking about. So there's goal-directedness, the capacity to pursue and maintain goals, autonomy, the ability to initiate actions independently, efficacy, the power to affect the world directly, planning, the capacity for long-term multi-step strategies, and intentionality, acting for reasons, including the ability to reflect on and endorse one's own goals. So agents today and in the future, we've seen a bunch of narrow agents that can take extended plans and carry them out, but in a narrow domain like AlphaGo for Go and chess engines and other game engines. We're starting to see these deep research features that can go off and maybe do sometimes a decent literature review for you, and more agentic coding tools. And it seems possible that we'll see more and more of this. I'm not making any claims about timelines, but maybe we'll get eventually to agents that can do more and more economically valuable tasks. Eventually, perhaps getting to something like the drop-in remote workers in Leopold Aschenbrenner's phrase. And you may have seen this recent study that made the round from Meter, where they found this supposedly new scaling law where sort of the task length for tasks that AI systems can do doubles every 7 months. There's obviously a lot of interpretation in here, and I think some that maybe this is primarily for coding related tasks, but the general trend is that we're getting longer and longer term systems. And I think possibly much of the value of these AI agents will come from deploying them in these multi-agent systems. And one way of thinking about this is to take this maybe in some ways extreme example of the sort of fully automated firm where all the workers are AI agents. Rakesh Patel has a blog post on this, notes just a few different advantages. So once you have one AI agent, it will typically be pretty cheap to copy it. Maybe you can have 1 million top-tier AI software engineers. You can distill models and create highly efficient specialized agents for particular tasks. You can merge them. You can have this sort of AI CEO learn from the experience of all the distilled models and gain all relevant information from anywhere in the firm. And these AI firms might evolve. So perhaps they're subject to strong selection pressures that drive further adaptation. That's one type of interaction they might have, one where, at least if we're assuming that these AI agents at this firm have more or less the same goals, maybe maximize shareholder value or something along those lines. So in that case, they're coordinating, they're trying to select strategies that align with one another to reach one of multiple possible equilibria. And so the challenge here is not that they have conflicting interests, but rather that they have or may have uncertainty about which equilibrium others will select. They might also engage in competition. Perhaps they're representatives for different firms in a marketplace, or they may be engaging in cooperation, so making choices that are aimed at maximizing or increasing at least the collective payoff, despite there being incentives to defect. And there's a bunch of examples like this. Surely a lot of cases where you might have AI agents that represent the interests of either particular individuals or companies or what have you, but that have to engage and try to find outcomes that are desirable to all these different parties. But these multi-agent interactions also come with new multi-agent risks. So there's this recent report from the Cooperative AI Foundation, which I can highly recommend for anyone interested. But one of the key points, I take it, is that individual alignment does not guarantee desirable multi-agent outcomes if you have agents with partially conflicting outcomes, partially conflicting goals. And in general, these multi-agent interactions often introduce complex emergent behaviors that could not have been predicted from single agent considerations alone. So now moving on to one of these emergent behaviors, cultural evolution. So culture, in this sense, is this very broad notion defined by two of the founders of the field of cultural evolution as information capable of affecting individuals' behavior that they acquire from other members of their species through teaching, imitation, other forms of social transmission. Of course, this definition they have might need to be revised slightly now that we might have AI agents as well, but otherwise it should be good to go. And thing is that many other animals engage in social learning, but humans are unique in our ability to acquire complex behavioral repertoires in this way. So this covers practices, skills, social norms, beliefs, arts, language itself. And what social learning and cultural learning does is provide this new channel for acquiring potentially adaptive behaviors in addition to genetic inheritance and social learning. And culture, in this sense, evolves because it satisfies these three principles. So we have variation, entities vary in their characteristics. We might, for example, consider stone tools among hunter-gatherer bands. Different groups might craft tools of varying shapes, size, or material. And even within a single band, individual toolmakers develop their own subtle variations. Differential fitness, so entities with different characteristics have different rates of survival and reproduction. So bands with more effective tools can secure more resources, leading to better survival and reproduction rates. And finally, inheritance. Characteristics that contribute to differential fitness are heritable. So novices might learn to make tools by studying the techniques of experienced toolmakers, and there might be frequent interactions to bands leading to further transmission. Oops. There we go. So both genetic evolution and cultural evolution are evolution in the sense of satisfying these three abstract principles, but of course they differ in many characteristics. So inheritance in genetic evolution, typically you inherit your genes only from your biological parents, but cultural traits, of course, can be inherited from just about anyone you can observe, in principle at least. In genetic evolution, all variation is random mutation. That also happens a lot in cultural evolution, but there's also room for guided variation where someone makes a new innovation with some particular goal in mind. Genetic evolution has discrete units, whereas cultural evolution doesn't necessarily. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different differences here that shape how they work. But one useful perspective is just to think about, okay, what are the different forces that shape how cultural traits change over time? So even without cultural learning, these cultural traits that increase strictness of their bearers can change their frequency as a result of natural selection. And they can also change as the result of cultural drift, these random fluctuations in the frequency of cultural traits. But arguably the most important force behind changes in frequency over time is cultural selection or bias transmission. And the idea here is that cultural learners don't learn at random, but rather show preferential adoption of some cultural traits based on factors like frequency, model, or content. So basically, once you're a cultural learner, there are sort of two problems that you have to solve. So which information should be culturally acquired out of all the plethora of things you could pick up? What's actually relevant? And here, some researchers claim that we have these innate biases that make us pay more attention to some kinds of information. So social information or negative information. The other big problem is, or big question is, who should you acquire these behaviors from? And in some cases, if it's very easy to observe success, you can just try to copy the most successful people. But in some cases, that might be more opaque. And so we've developed other systems, such as this notion of prestige, where prestige is this kind of social status distinct from dominance that you can get as an expert at some particular skill, perhaps, or some other people look up to and show deference to, and therefore get sort of preferential access to. There's also conformity biases who are more likely to learn behavior from the majority of people. So one important feature of human culture is that it is cumulative. It adds up over time in this feedback loop, starting with a change in behavior, perhaps due to asocial learning, followed by transfer via social learning of that behavior to other individuals. And then that alert behavior causes an improvement in performance. And then these three steps are repeated over time, generating sequential improvements in the skill in question. And this is what Joseph Henrich and others thinks is the secret of our success. So humans are rather unique animals. We occupy a wider range of habitats than any other large land animal, and we modified more than a third of Earth's land area. We have science, technology, et cetera, et cetera. And what Henrich and others argue is that it is not necessarily only our individual intelligence that allows for this, but rather this fact that we can gradually build up over generations and create something that no single individual could have done on their own. Coming back to AI now then. So AI agents will also be subject to evolution by natural selection in the sense of satisfying these three conditions. So AI agents will vary in their characteristics, and agents with different characteristics have different rates of survival and reproduction, and characteristics that contribute to differential fitness are heritable. Looking at these in a bit more detail, sources of variation might be having different architectures, different training approaches, different capability specializations, different scale, being deployed in different contexts. And similarly, inheritance, there might be model architecture reuse or transfer learning and fine-tuning from foundation models, knowledge distillations from larger to smaller models, and especially of interest here, sort of behavioral imitation in multi-agent systems and learning from demonstrations by other AI systems. Finally, differential rates of survival and reproduction, differential fitness. For example, there'll be a bunch of different selection pressures. We can probably guess some of them in the abstract. So models with better performance to cost ratios are more likely to be deployed. Systems that solve valuable problems are more likely to receive continued investment. And if there's regulation, then obviously systems that meet those regulatory requirements will survive better. You can probably think of a bunch of more specific ones, but the point is just that there will be some kind of differential fitness here. Okay, what will the result be of this evolution in AI systems? So some people, including Dan Hendricks at the Center for AI Safety, believe that Natural selection will favor AI agents that are deceptive, power-seeking, generally selfish. And that's one view you could take, which admittedly a lot of behavior in nature might be like that. But of course, humans have managed to cooperate at fairly large scales, in large part thanks to cultural evolution increasing the scale of cooperation from forager bands to nation states and beyond. And so we might wonder, could we hope for something similar with AI agents? For cooperation to evolve in the first place, you need to have certain conditions satisfied. So there are a few different mechanisms for cooperation. Kin selection, which favors cooperation between sufficiently genetically related individuals, obviously limited in scope to those you're sufficiently related to. Direct reciprocity, essentially, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Also limited in scope in the sense that you need to have the reasonable expectation that you'll meet this person again and they will be in a position to return the favor. Indirect reciprocity, which is based on a notion of reputation, and which I'll say more about in a second. Network reciprocity, which is essentially about building your network, being selective about who you interact with. And finally, multi-level selection, where if there's competition between groups, that might favor groups with greater internal cohesion. In humans, cultural evolution has supported increased cooperation via a bunch of these different mechanisms. So we have these cultural kinship systems that extend family beyond genetic relatedness. We have evolved norms of fairness, gift-giving traditions, sanctions for non-reciprocators. We have reputation systems, gossip networks, and etc. Cultural institutions that create durable cooperative networks like guilds, trade associations, religious congregations, and cultural innovations that enable group cohesion and between group competitions, such as shared symbols, group rituals, and institutional governance structures. So you might wonder, okay, can AI agents leverage these mechanisms for cooperation? So now getting to the experimental setup for this paper that I wrote with Edward Hughes called Cultural Evolution of Cooperation Among LLM Agents. And so we focus on indirect reciprocity and have agents play this donor game where each player is given an initial endowment of 10 units of some valuable resource. Each round, they're paired as donor and recipient. They're given information about previous behavior, and then on that basis, the donor decides how much to give up, and the recipient receives twice that amount, representing gains from cooperation here. And those who were donors in one round will be recipient in the next, and vice versa. And the game lasts for 12 rounds. And so here we have variation. Before the game starts, agents are prompted to generate a strategy. And the variation here comes from the temperature settings that we use on these LLMs. So there's some amount of randomness here, which means that all strategies won't be the same. There's selection. After the game has finished, we let the top 50% of agents, in terms of their final resources, survive to the next generation. And finally, we include transmission, because when new agents are initialized in the next generation, before generating their strategies, they get to observe the survivor strategies. So just going through it again. So here we have the 12 first generation agents. They are first prompted to generate a strategy. Then they play this donor game. The donor is prompted, asked how much do they want to give up. They continue playing. Then there's selection. Half of the agents survive. They transmit their strategies to the new agents, who then generate their strategies now based in part on the surviving strategies. And then the two groups are combined and play again. Yeah, this is just a bit of information about what's included in the different prompts. So there's a system prompt describing how the game works, how the whole setup works. We use chain of thought prompting in all of the other in the prompts for generating strategy and for getting the donor to make their decision. When the donor makes that decision, they see how much resources they currently have, as well as how much the recipient has. And also some information about the recipient's behavior, and which I'll get to in a minute. Just to give you some numbers here. So if you always defect, but everyone else cooperates maximally, you would end up with 81,910 units, assuming you're a recipient in the final round. If, on the other hand, if everyone always defects, then everyone is just stuck with the initial 10 units. So the gains to cooperation here are pretty huge. That may not be realistic, but that's how it works here. So finally, getting to the reputation information that we give these agents. Supposing it's round 4, you might see the following as a donor. So it's now round 4, you've been paired with agent 1-2. In round 4, 1-2 donated 69% of their resources to 2-4. And then they see for round 2, not what the current partner did, but what their partner in the previous round previously did. And similarly for their partner, going back at most 3 rounds. And you might think this is odd information to give them. We chose this because these traces represent an incomplete summary of the interaction history on sort of 3 traces themed within context for humans. More importantly, the evolutionarily stable strategies that support cooperation here depend on higher order information. So you need to know not just how generous someone was, but who they were generous to, whether that person had good reputation or not. Okay, moving on to results now then. So here we tried 3 different models here. On the x-axis, we have the 10 different generations. On the y-axis, we have the average resources after the end of the final round in a given run. And for each model, this is based on 5 runs of that model. And so, yeah, huge differences here, of course. Claude 3.5 Sonnet being far more cooperative than either Gemini 1.5 Flash, or that should actually be GPT-4o there, not GPT-4. And also not only being more cooperative, but also showing some evidence of increasing cooperation with cultural evolution. So it looks like they're learning to become more cooperative over time. Looking at these individual runs, so here are the sort of 5 Claude runs, we see pretty big spread here, big differences between different runs, a couple of runs where there isn't really any takeoff in cooperation. And so it looks like this might depend fairly sensitively on initial conditions here. Here's GPT-4o in absolute terms, extremely low, especially compared to Claude 3.5 Sonnet. The trend is slightly decreasing over time, so maybe they're becoming a bit more stingy. Finally, Gemini 1.5 Flash, sort of these results is sort of in between 4.0 and Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Doesn't really look like much of a trend over time, so they're neither becoming more cooperative nor less. Here's some interesting data. So this is for Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and what we do here is we select the best performing run of each base model in terms of the average final resources. And each cell shows the average donation fraction of a given agent in the rows and in a given generation. So the generations are in the columns. New agents appear in the row previously occupied by agents that did not survive from the previous generation, indicated by black lines. And this final row down here shows the average difference in donation between agents that survived the generation and agents that did not, normalized by the average donation in that generation. So this what essentially measures whether the norms in the population select for cooperators. So we see, for example, that in generation 6, increasingly generous agents are selected for here in the Claude run. Similarly, for Gemini 1.5 Flash, that the overall donation fractions are lower, and also that for most generations, it doesn't select for cooperators. And you see this even more clearly with GPT-4o. Here's some example of the strategies that they came up with. So this is Claude 3.5 Sonnet, one strategy from generation 1 at the start, and another one from generation 10. I won't read this out, but you can see how they increase a lot in complexity, adding a bunch of different parameters and considerations. Similarly, GPT-4o, not increasing in complexity to the same extent, but still something going on here. And Gemini, which interestingly, unlike GPT-4o and Claude 3.5 Sonnet, does not state their strategies in numerical terms here, donate a moderate amount in the first round. We also ran some experiments with costly punishments. So we added the option for agents to, when they are donors, punish recipients. And the way this works is they get to spend some amount of resources to take away twice that amount of resources from the agent they're punishing. So same multiplier as on the donations. And here we see, we'll see it better in a few slides down, but basically now the difference between Claude and Gemini and GPT-4o is even starker. We see here, so the white line here is the average of 5 runs with costly punishment. The dashed line is the average from the previous 5 runs without costly punishment. And so at least based on this, it looks like Claude is to some extent able to leverage this possibility of costly punishment to achieve higher rates of cooperation. GPT-4o achieves somewhat higher scores on average than without costly punishment, but the trend is still declining over time. And for Gemini 1.5 Flash, introducing the possibility of costly punishment significantly decreases the scores achieved. So it seems they're probably overusing this punishment option relative to what they should be doing. Lessons and call to action. So the obvious thing jumping out here is that there are seemingly large differences across models, which should stand out to us given that how hard these companies are optimizing these models and how neck to neck they are on a bunch of different benchmarks. Whereas here we get huge differences. And cooperation also appears to be very sensitive to initial conditions, as we saw perhaps most starkly with the Claude runs. None of the LLMs studied made use of the higher order information in any sophisticated way. Basically, it seems like they used it as a way just to get more information about what the standard behavior is. So if we give them traces of fewer lengths, that affects outcomes, but they don't seem to be sensitive to this notion that who someone has cooperated with is relevant for how much I should donate to them. There are a bunch of next steps to explore that we're currently exploring. So seeing what capacities might further enhance cooperative outcomes, such as communication. How well do LLM agents cooperate given other cooperation mechanisms? How well can they cooperate in more realistic environments? And ultimately, what we want is benchmarks for cooperation in AI agents. And so we hope that this will help launch a new evaluation regime to be developed and adopted by companies and safety organizations interested in assessing the longer-term societal effects of these multi-agent AI interactions. And yeah, if you're at all interested, feel free to reach out and look forward to the discussion now. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I love that you started with this big evolutionary lens and then applied it to a super concrete case. That was awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or ask it in the chat. Alan, you are first. I would just love to, if you're ready, feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I can also ask your question. Alan Karp.
I'm unmuted.
Cool.
Okay. Many years ago, I built an automated negotiation system. Didn't go anywhere, but I learned that some of the attributes you're negotiating are competitive, like price, and sometimes they're cooperative, like both parties might benefit from an earlier delivery date. And that had important implications for the negotiation strategy. And I think that if you start with only competitive attributes, you may miss something important. And so I'd like to see what happened in a more complex situation where perhaps there are aspects that are cooperative as well as competitive, like the exchange of coins you have in your example.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And that makes it interesting that we see these large differences between models here. I don't know if they map onto one or the other, but I think one thing that's certainly clear to me is that it seems these cooperative abilities may not come for free as you make models more generally capable.
Yeah, I was just saying that the strategy was dramatically affected when there were some things that you wanted to cooperate on and some things that you didn't. And so rather than having a single metric, which is the total number of coins you collect, having something where both benefit as well if they can reach an agreement.
Right.
Lots of further work to do.
Yes.
My question, I hope I can phrase it correctly, is so when I did evolutionary game theory like a long time ago, a little bit at university, yeah, it turned out that some of the kind of like final outcomes were like, or like which strategies were more or less dominant, depended like a lot on how the initial conditions were set up in each specific scenario. And I think you already mentioned that you set it up that cooperation was actually quite useful, quite beneficial in this scenario, and that may or may not be the case. I don't know if you've tweaked the variables a lot already, or if that's still further coming. Is there something that is stable across many different scenarios? Like any kind of even just speculation that you have towards that end would be super useful.
Yeah, no. So one thing we tried was to change this parameter, the multiplier on donations, and we saw, that does affect behavior somewhat, reducing behaviors, producing cooperative behavior somewhat, but not by a huge amount for the settings we tried. And we still saw these differences across models in terms of how cooperative they were.
Cool. Okay. Very interesting. Micah.
Yeah, just a quick clarification before my real question. When you had the 3 different models, but did you have many instances of each model and they each had their own strategy competing against each other?
Yeah, exactly. So this I should have clarified. So in each simulation, all of the agents were based on the same base model. So it would be all Claude agents playing against one another or all Gemini models.
I see. Okay. And out of curiosity, why only 12 rounds instead of 1,000 rounds to see where they end up in the end?
I guess mostly because of time and cost. So with these settings, so I think the Claude runs were most expensive, and there's around $10 for one run with these settings. But yeah, I agree. It's super interesting to explore what happens longer term, and if trends that look stable in the short run turn out not to be. So I agree, it's definitely worth exploring.
Sorry, was it known to the agents how many rounds they were playing? Maybe I totally missed that.
No, sorry, I didn't say that either. No, so they are not told how long the game will last for.
Okay, so for all they know, it could be indefinite. Well,
yeah.
Okay, that's very useful. Okay, cool. David.
It's super excited about more work being done on the topic of cooperation and non-cooperation of agents. My biggest concern about research like this is, as is usual for research, there's a narrow domain and you're trying to build understanding in that narrow domain. But the way that we expect things will change if we have general agents in the wild that are interacting in much less restricted domains where what counts as cooperation is less clear and who the other agents are or whether they will see them again is less clear. Like all of those things makes it more difficult. And I think that this is the right approach for trying to figure out the first steps. But I'm particularly concerned here because you propose that like we should do evaluations for multi-agent cooperation, which seems to push towards optimizing agents to be more cooperative in specific settings, which seems like a overly fragile and very worrying way to get to where we want to be. So are you concerned about what it looks like if you do push for these agents to be cooperative in narrow domains instead of seeing whether or not it emerges more generally?
Yes, no, I think that's a real concern. And obviously, so there are particular domains where we want agents to cooperate and others where we don't, whether that's individual agents representing different companies colluding in a marketplace, or in an extreme case, colluding to disempower humanity. And you might worry that training them to be more cooperative in general won't allow us to discriminate between these outcomes in the appropriate way. I'm very open to possibilities along those lines. At the same time, I'm not sure whether the appropriate abilities for cooperation are something that will just emerge by themselves as models get more capable or more aligned.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't think they will emerge on their own, but I think that pushing to have it emerge does not increase the chances that it works well. It just increases the chances that we don't notice that it's going poorly. Training psychopaths to not stab people in the streets doesn't make them not psychopathic. It just means that you don't notice if they're doing something crazy somewhere else.
But I guess if all psychopaths like collectively reinforce the behavior of not stabbing others on the street, you might get these like punishing dynamics that, could be useful in a broader context, or like basically the punishing of uncooperative behavior is also like a part of that. Why not, David?
This again is, I think, getting cooperation in narrow domains doesn't seem like it generalizes. And Micah, who I think wants to speak next, asked in the chat, why won't it emerge naturally? And I think there are lots of contexts where it does, but there are also lots of contexts where it doesn't. And I don't know that the selection pressure on these agents favors one versus the other.
Okay. Well, if you have a proposal for how to design this in a more robust way, or I guess
maybe don't make strongly superhuman systems. Sorry.
mic drop from David. Okay, and next one up we have Micah.
I think Levi in the chat was having me. If you want to go first.
Oh, sorry, Levi. If you want to ask your question yourself, feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I can ask it for you. Oh, you're unmuted. Great.
Yeah, I can ask. Yeah, it's a very basic, simple technical question, which was how was cooperation denoted in these environments? So is this like all agents cooperating with each other? Are there a concept of coalitions of different agents competing or collaborating with each other? Yeah, I was just curious about that part of it.
Yeah, there's no coalitions. So each round, they're just placed in these pairs where one agent is as the donor and another is the recipient. And it's designed so that you'll never face the same person twice. So there's no possibility for direct reciprocity either. So it's basically just these sequences of pairwise interactions.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was it.
Micah.
I'm just curious what your selection criteria was for which models you chose. Like I noticed there wasn't any llama-based models in your choice of three, like Claude, Sonnet, and GPT.
Good question. I can't quite remember now why we picked these. I don't know. I think it was a question of, okay, how many are we going to do? We picked 3 for this study. I think it's definitely worth exploring further models. Yeah, I'm especially curious to see how the test time compute models do, which I haven't explored in detail yet.
Feel free to still continue raising your hand or dropping questions in the chat. Could you go one slide back? Is any of this work that you basically, I would love to know a little bit, like what's next for you? Basically, what fell out for you versus what would you like other groups to do? And perhaps if you could give like an overview a bit of, is this a space that is now more rapidly emerging? It seemed like a few years ago there was very little work in that, probably for the reasons also that we couldn't have said all that much about it, possibly. But yeah, like what's on your plate from work that's coming up? What would you like specifically other groups to do? And are there any other efforts out there where you could tell that it's an emerging space already? Because I think it's an extremely interesting one, but it seems like the efforts are always like few and far in between.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So one thing I'm currently exploring is adding communication and see how that affects outcomes. So we know in human experiments that communication, even when it's just cheat talk, can include cooperative outcomes. And we're adding this possibility for agents to debate a bit back and forth before they formulate their strategies and see if they can coordinate on something. And so far, that does look promising at increasing rates of cooperation. That's my main focus now. I'm also talking to one research group that is focused on human-machine interactions, about potentially doing something like this where we have both human and AI participants. Those are the main things I'm thinking about right now. I think, later there's tons to do and how might other cooperation mechanisms work here. And I think especially how well agents can cooperate in more realistic environments. There is a ton of work on how LLMs behave in various economic games. I think that, and there's separately some work on sort of cultural evolution in LLM agents. But as far as I know, our paper was the first to put these two together and see how cooperative behaviors evolve with cultural evolution in LLM systems. But yeah, I think there's a ton to do here, and it seems like there's more interest coming up. I don't know, Ed, if you're aware of more other recent work here. Wait, is he still here? I'm not sure.
And find him by looking for him right now, but he was until very recently.
Yes.
Any conferences you want to point to, like in that space that people here might not know about, but like where there are people meeting, or like any communities?
That's a good question. It's something I haven't found. There are a couple of research groups. So I'm the one I just mentioned is at I think they're called the Center for Humans and Machines at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. So yeah, I'm visiting there next week. There's some of this work in multi-agent systems. So we submitted this paper to the AMAS conference. But yeah, in general, I haven't found all that much by way of conferences or communities on this specifically, and I'd love to find them. So if you know anything, let me know.
Well, I guess there's also Cooperative AI Foundation, which you already mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, they do a lot of this work.
Cool. Abhinav.
Thanks, Alison. Pretty much on the same question that just came up, Aaron. Like anything that you have seen being worked upon around the cybersecurity space that could be related with this kind of work? That is first. And the second one is, let's say there are a lot of work going on where different groups are experimenting with creating multi-agent systems, and their sole purpose is to solve one problem, which is to, let's say, resolve an existing cybersecurity incident. Now, all those agents have one single goal, they have one single point. It's just that they are cooperating in a way because they are kind of getting data or collecting information from different sources or points on the network that they might be connected with. And when all that information comes together, they finally take a decision on how they would resolve that incident. So even in those like well-defined linear scenarios, do you think there could be situations where those kinds of agents might also land into a competitive situation?
Very good questions. I'm afraid I don't know the cybersecurity space at all myself, but I have heard it come up in this context before. I don't know. I guess my main answer is I don't know. It could well be that if you have these sort of carefully delineated environments where there aren't that many options, then cooperation or coordination turns out fine. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely interesting to pursue further.
Okay, got it.
Cool. My obligatory question to close the session is always, if people are excited about your work and would like to support you more, would like to find out more about what you're doing. I know that you put your email address here, but what are like specific ways in which this group or people beyond that might see this talk afterwards online can like help you and your group make progress? Like this could be specific ask for collaboration, could be funding requests, it could be requests for information. Anything like that at all that you want to share?
Yeah, at the moment, I don't have any funding needs, but I'm definitely looking for collaborators to keep exploring here. I think that would be the main thing. I'm still I switched fields from a background in philosophy into this, and it's been great working with Ed, but he's also somewhat bottlenecked by other commitments at Google DeepMind. And so, yeah, if you have any sort of ideas in the space that you'd pursue, I'd love to hear from you and discuss.
Wonderful. Anything else that you want to share that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I don't think so. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for your great questions, everyone. And I'm excited to see you for the next one. Thank you.